Well, thank you very much. It's good to be back before this totally irreverent group. And I have an important announcement to make right at the outset. I know you've been dying of curiosity, but I'm here to tell you I voted for Mitt Romney. Also, I'm pleased that Elaine could be here today and was recognized in the introduction. There's no way I can overstate how proud I think we all are to have the first Kentuckian in a cabinet of any president since World War II, and the only Kentucky woman who's ever served in the cabinet. I would simply add she was also the only member of President Bush's cabinet who was there from the beginning to the end. So obviously he had a lot of confidence in her work. And so I wanted to recognize that and thank Elaine again for her great public service on behalf of all of us. A good place to start is elections have consequences. And our friends on the other side, and back in 2008, had a really good election. When the smoke cleared, we had a brand new president. His party had a 40-seat majority in the House. They had 60 votes in the Senate. For those of you who are not political junkies, 51 is a majority, but 60 is control in the Senate, because a lot of what we do requires a supermajority of 60 votes. Honestly, they could do whatever they wanted to, and they did. The $1 trillion stimulus, the takeover of American health care, Dodd-Frank. For those of you who are not in financial services, I describe Dodd-Frank as Obamacare for banks. An army of regulators crawling all over every business in America with the view that if you're making a profit, you're surely up to no good. You must be cheating your customers or mistreating your employees or both, and they're here to help you. So this sort of bureaucracy on steroids has been descending across the country over the last 6 years. And, you know, after 6 years of this, I think it's appropriate to ask the question, how did it all work out? We've added more debt during the Obama years than all the presidents from George Washington down to George Bush. You wouldn't think that'd be possible in such a short period of time. Elaine explained to me how unemployment is figured. It's figured based on the labor participation rate, that is, those willing and anxious to work. The labor participation rate in America today is what it was during the Carter administration. Obviously, the number of people is a lot greater. So a lot of people have just dropped out and given up. If you had the kind of labor participation rate we ought to have, unemployment would be up in the double digits. So this fantasy that we're in the middle of a serious recovery is nonsense. This is the slowest recovery after a deep recession since World War II. I've looked at all of them. The pattern has been, in the past, going back to World War II, the deeper the recession, the quicker the bounce back, until this one. I think it's appropriate to conclude after 6 years of borrowing and spending and taxing and over-regulations that this sort of thing does not produce a vibrant economy. If you're looking for a parallel, look to Western Europe. Big debts, high taxes, over-regulation gives you slow growth. Looks a lot like America over the last 6 years. There was, however, one thing that they couldn't get through the first 2 years of the president's tenure when he controlled everything. They got it through the House, but they couldn't get it through the Senate, and that was cap and trade. That is, the effort to get at the problem that some people feel is a big problem for the world, global carbon emissions. It could not pass the Senate when they owned the place. Then in 2010, you saw the American people took a look at the first 2 years of the Obama administration, and they seemed to be seized with buyer's remorse. You know, as one pundit put it, they issued a national restraining order. and they changed the House and made me the leader of a more consequential minority in the Senate. And that was the first time I was wrong in predicting what the president would do. I thought he would move to the political center after losing the House and not having a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, and look for areas of agreement, because in fact it's counterintuitive, but divided government has frequently been pretty darn good. Let me give you some examples. President Reagan never had the House in 8 years. President Clinton didn't have the House or the Senate for 6 of his 8 years. Yet both of them managed to finish up an 8-year presidency in pretty good shape and had important things they could point to. Of course, they were done on a bipartisan basis. Reagan and Tip O'Neill did probably what the hardest thing you could ever do, and that's adjust the eligibility for Social Security, and it saved it for a generation. Reagan and Tip O'Neill did the last comprehensive tax reform. We need to do that again. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the industrialized world. It's the quickest way in the world to export jobs. Bill Clinton and the Republicans did welfare reform and actually balanced the budget 3 years in a row in the late 90s. So just because the American people elect divided government doesn't mean they expect nothing to happen. But the key player, always remember, is the one person out of the 330 million or so of us who can sign something into law and deliver the members of his party to vote for a deal that he makes. Congress, by its very nature, is a risk-averse institution, and you can understand that. You've got people from all over the country with different points of view, all pouring into one place, trying to sort things out. You need presidential leadership to deliver the members of the president's party to vote for a deal he makes if he's willing to make one. But the president didn't seem to be interested when Speaker Boehner and I tried to get him to tackle some of the mega issues confronting the future of the country. There have been some agreements. In fact, I negotiated the only agreements we've had with the Democrats during this period. These were situations where I thought it was worth getting involved and trying to sort it out, because the end result was we were either continuing lower tax rates or we were reducing spending. The first occasion that Biden and I negotiated was the December 2010 2-year extension of the Bush tax cuts. The Democrats hate, detested, and despised the Bush tax cuts, yet they went along with a 2-year extension. Why would I not like that? So I was very happy with that. Then in August of 2011, the president, the one and only time the president seemed to have an interest in joining with us to reduce government spending without raising taxes. That was called the Budget Control Act of August 2011. Biden and I negotiated that deal. And even though it didn't get much coverage, it actually reduced federal government spending for 2 years in a row for the first time since right after the Korean War, without raising taxes. That's my definition of success. The third occasion was the fiscal cliff deal. December the 31st, 2012. I'd have rather been with Elaine New Year's Eve. I was with Joe again. The Bush tax cuts that we'd gotten a 2-year extension were over. And obviously what I had hoped to get more than anything else was to save as many Americans as I could from a tax increase and to make it permanent law so we don't have these cliffs. Cliff after cliff after cliff. We were never able to make the Bush tax cuts permanent when we had the House, the Senate, and the President. We always had to do it in slugs, and that was because we could never get enough Democrats to join us to get the 60 votes in the Senate. So amazingly enough, what came out of the December 2012 fiscal cliff deal was permanent Bush tax cuts for 99%. Now, some of you are the 1%, but permanent Bush tax cuts for 99% of Americans and Kentuckians. And the thing that I wanted the most was a $5 million per person estate tax exemption indexed to inflation and permanent law. And what that will do is save just about every small business and family farm in Kentucky from having to be sold if you're fortunate enough to have members of your family who want to continue what you've spent a lifetime building, your small business or your family farm. That's my definition of a good deal. And so on 3 occasions, pundits have argued I was the adult in the room who got the deal done. So I don't want you to think that I'm unwilling to deal with the president. He will be there for 2 more years, no matter what. But you can't get anywhere unless the guy who's got the pen is in the room. And on those occasions, he deputized Biden to do it. Unfortunately, there have not been other occasions where the president seemed to be willing to move to the political center. I think that's too bad for the country, because divided government, it's counterintuitive, I know, but divided government is actually the best time to tackle really tough stuff, because tough stuff is hard to do politically. To give you an example, after Bush was reelected in 2004, he wanted us to try to fix Social Security. I spent a year trying to get any Democrat in the Senate, even the most reasonable Democrat of all, Joe Lieberman, to help us. And here's what they said. You guys have the White House, you guys have the House, you guys have the Senate. You want to fix Social Security? You do it. What's the message? You do it and we're going to kill you in the next election. So there are some limitations frequently on doing really difficult stuff when you have unified government. So divided government can be an opportunity if you have the kind of presidential leadership that you need, and that Reagan and Clinton both demonstrated. Maybe it wasn't their first choice to do it, but they did it. It's an opportunity to do big things for the country. Now, I know the president's going to be there for 2 more years. My first choice is for him to move in a different direction, because whatever he does, they will follow. Go back to the fiscal cliff deal just for a minute to illustrate my point. When it was clear that Biden and I were going to negotiate the final deal, Nancy Pelosi started phone banking me saying, you can't put that estate tax exemption in there because my members won't vote for it. We like the estate tax. You see, these guys think they ought to be able to step in at the end of your life and confiscate your property and redistribute it the way they want to. My view is the government's final insult is that you have to visit both the undertaker and the IRS on the same day. So I listened politely. I like Nancy Pelosi. I listened politely and I said, thank you, Nancy, for your advice. Obviously, what I wanted was in the bill. And you know how many of her members voted against it? 15. And only 3 Senate Democrats voted against it. And the reason is, when you have the White House, honestly, that's the main person for your party. The only Democrat who counts in Washington right now is the President of the United States. He's the Democrat, the guy who can deliver if he chooses to. So these occasions that I've mentioned, my friends, have been all too seldom. Basically, the president's approach has been, I'm going to try to achieve through the bureaucracy what I want to. And the role of the Senate Democratic majority has been to keep those pesky members of Congress off my back. I bet not a one of you in the room know this because it's not been widely discussed. The president's only vetoed 2 bills in 6 years. They were little bills over a technicality. So fundamentally, he hadn't vetoed anything in 6 years. First 2 years, he loved everything he got, signing ceremonies, handing out pens, and all the rest. The last 4 years, he never gets anything that makes him even remotely uncomfortable, because the Senate is the firewall that prevents almost anything from happening. We don't even vote anymore in the Senate. There's a Democratic senator running for re-election this year, freshman, been there 6 years, never had a roll call vote on an amendment on the floor of the Senate in a 6-year term. The Senate has just literally been shut down. The House, who the president spends almost every day blaming for everything that's wrong in the country, has passed over 300 bills, many of them on a bipartisan basis. They come over to the Senate and drop in a black hole. Looking at it another way, there have been 23 roll call votes on the floor of the Senate on amendments in the last year. in the last year. There is one freshman Democratic House member from Houston who's had more votes than Senate Republicans and Democrats combined in the last year. So I give you these statistics just to point out that the role of the Senate the last 4 years for Barack Obama has been to shut the thing down, so my bureaucracy can do whatever it wants to. And the most conspicuous example of that some of you may think is far away from you and unrelated to your daily lives is the war on coal. The president could not get cap and trade through the Congress the first 2 years when he owned the place, and so he's going to do it anyway. And there are two regulations. One, if it goes through, will guarantee that there's never another coal-fired generation plant built in America, ever. The second one targets existing coal-fired plants. Now, 90% of our electricity in Kentucky comes from coal-fired generation. We have been fortunate to be among the top 5 of the lowest utility rates in any given year for as long as anybody can remember. That, coupled with our good location, is why we land things like Toyota, because power costs are really, really important. Now, some of you are thinking, well, but this is a global problem and we really ought to address it. So let me talk about that a minute. You'd be interested to know that Europe, where this old movement started, is having second thoughts. Germany, which is the greenest country in Europe, is now importing coal. The Chinese are building coal-fired plants. The Indians recently said, you'll really enjoy this, you're familiar with Greenpeace, the organization Greenpeace? The Indians declared Greenpeace a threat to their economy and said they have no interest in limiting carbon emissions. And the Australians, under a left-wing government a few years ago, passed a carbon tax, their version of what the president's trying to do through EPA. 3 months ago, they repealed it. So my point is, even if you thought this was an important global concern to be addressed, your country doing it all by itself is going to have about as much impact as dropping a pebble in an ocean. In the ocean. They're not going to do it. And so here we are off on this crusade that no one else is following. And in eastern Kentucky, we've lost 7,000 coal mining jobs during the Obama years. For every coal mining job, you lose 3 more. I was at the mouth of several mines 2 days ago, still operating. The fellow who operates the mine said, I had 150 employees, I've only got 50 now. We're hanging on by our fingernails. So this is a government-induced depression that will affect you in Louisville, Kentucky, because your rates are going to go up. And so I hope we can begin to turn this around. As you know, I'm currently, if you're a football fan, I know we're mostly basketball in this state, but occasionally you guys watch football. I'm currently the defensive coordinator. And you know, you can score occasionally on defense, but it's hard. The offensive coordinator is the one who calls the plays and has a better chance of putting points on the board. Harry Reid is the offensive coordinator. He has said famously, quote, coal makes you sick, end quote. You get the drift. Senator Paul and I have been trying to get votes on these EPA regulations for years. We can't even get a vote. Putting a Kentuckian in the Senate as the offensive coordinator gives our state a leg up. Only one member of the Senate gets to determine what the agenda is. Every senator has 1 vote, but only one senator gets to determine what the agenda is. Having a Kentuckian setting the agenda for the country has only happened one other time. Alvin Barkley, who was leader of the Democrats in the 30s and 40s, he was mostly the offensive coordinator. He was for a while the defensive coordinator. As the offensive coordinator, I'm in an even better position than I am now, and I'm in a pretty good position now to look out for Kentucky's interest on a daily basis, to set a new agenda for the country, to begin to take us in a different direction. There are limits to how much we can change directions, obviously, because the guy with the pen would have to show some flexibility. But there are some advantages. If you're not happy with where the country is now and you'd like to see us go in a different direction, there are some advantages to changing the Senate. In fact, it's the only thing that can be done in 2014 to begin to change the country's direction. We'd be able to pass a budget. Congress doesn't do that much anymore. We'd be able to pass the bills that fund the government. And in those bills, we intend to push back against the bureaucratic excess and overreach that's been going on by using the one power Congress does have, and that's the power of the purse. We do get to appropriate the money. That has not worked with the Democratic Senate because they have not wanted the president to have any restraint whatsoever. They want him free to do what he wants to do. Now, I know you've heard from my opponent, and I will say to you we've finally discovered one thing that we agree on. One thing that we agree on. She is a new face. But I think it's appropriate for you to ask the question, a new face to do what? She's a new face to vote for the president's agenda. A new face to make Harry Reid the majority leader of the Senate. She's a new face for no change at all. So if you're happy with where we are, she's your candidate. She's your candidate. Beyond that, there is the whole question of loss of influence. I remember when I first got to the Senate. We don't do everything on a seniority basis. For example, my leadership position has nothing to do with seniority. But we do a lot of things on a seniority basis, up to and including the location of our desk on the Senate floor. So when I got there, I was 99th out of 100 overall. I was dead last on the Republican side, so it won't surprise you to know that I had the last desk over in the corner where the light's not even very good. If you've ever watched the Senate on C-SPAN 2, we don't usually sit where we're supposed to, but every once in a while we do. It's a special occasion where you sit where you're supposed to. The first time that happened to me in my Senate career, there I was over in the corner where the light's not very good. Everybody was sitting where they were supposed to. I looked around the room and I thought to myself, none of these people are ever going to die. Retire or be defeated. But alas, I have arguably the second best seat in the House now. I have a better than even chance of having the best seat, but it's not about me. This is about our state and about whether or not, as your representative, you'd like to have Kentucky calling the plays and going in a different direction. These opportunities don't come along all that often. I'm frequently asked, why are you having such a difficult race? And I say, well, life was simple before I became leader of my party in the Senate. Some of you old-timers may even remember that the last time I ran, before I was elected Republican leader of the Senate, I carried 113 out of 120 counties. I got 64% of the vote. The time before that, I beat Steve Beshear by 10 points, which was a landslide. What went wrong? Well, I got more responsibility and therefore a lot more people who wish me ill. You know, there's nobody in the country running this year the Democrats want to beat worse than the guy you're looking at. So, you know, they contribute large sums to whoever's running against Mcconnell. I had this experience in 2008 as well. So it balloons into a much, much bigger contest than your typical Senate race, because if you can raise enough money, you can put on a big race. And that's what you're witnessing. There's been a lot of confusion about polls floating around, you know. The bluegrass poll is always there near the end of my races to make me look bad. And so you saw that in the Courier a couple of years ago. I think the best way to look at the dueling poll business, look at what the candidates are running on the air. If you've seen any of my ads lately, they're largely positive accomplishment ads. If you've seen any of her ads lately, she's in them, accusing me of all kinds of things. The worst thing is she's got one up you won't see. It's off in Eastern Kentucky, accusing me of shutting down a power plant up there. And The Washington Post fact checker, I'm going to pull it up on my BlackBerry because you'll enjoy it. The Washington Post fact checker said, Grimes should be ashamed of herself. Allison Grimes is running what fact checkers call the worst ad of a nasty campaign year. Now that's pretty hard to pull off. You know? Imagine all the really nasty ads all over the country, the worst one of the year. That's really something to be proud of. So if you want to know where this race stands, watch what the candidates are putting on the air. Who's talking about what they've done and who is trying to tear down the other side as you go down the finish line, and that tells you all you need to know about the likely outcome of this contest. So maybe I will close by just saying this. Winston Churchill was widely thought to have said, there's some dispute about whether he ever said this or not, but was widely thought to have said the following about us, about Americans. Here's what he's supposed to have said. He said, you know, the Americans, they always do the right thing after they've tried everything else first. And that's sort of how I look at the last 6 years. If you think we can do better, if you think the country needs a new direction, then make me the leader of a new majority to set a new agenda for America to go in a different direction. Thank you so much.
As I mentioned, we collected questions from Rotarians earlier this week, and we have members of the Speakers Committee who will now ask those questions of Senator McConnell.
Good afternoon, Senator. Thank you for being with us. My name is Cynthia Napek with the Leadership Louisville Center, and the first question that was submitted for you is this. Should the Republicans gain control of the Senate, what are the first 3 items that you would address as the majority leader?
Well, at the risk of sounding like my opponent, obviously I'm not going to answer that question. I'll give you some thoughts. The reason I'm not going to answer the question is to lay out an agenda publicly at this point makes it look like you're measuring the drapes. And, but let me just give you an example of the kinds of things you could expect from a different Senate. I've said a couple of them. We'll actually be able to pass the budget. We will actually be able to pass the bills that fund the government. I think you could anticipate from us votes on the Keystone Pipeline, a job, you know, I'm stunned that this hadn't been approved. They've studied it for 6 years. Every study comes back, no impact on global carbon emissions, and yet it still hadn't been approved. In the healthcare field, I think you're likely to see a vote on repealing the individual mandate, a vote on repealing the medical device tax. Those are suspects that you're likely to see on the floor of the Senate. And as I said earlier, at the risk of repeating myself, if the President indicates that he wants to do some business on a couple of things that he said the right thing about, like comprehensive tax reform, he'd have to come off the requirement that we give him $1 trillion more in revenue as a condition to do it. The President's also talked about trade agreements. I'm a free trader. I think America benefits from trade agreements. He hadn't negotiated one in 6 years, but if he decides to send up trade agreements, I think he'd probably have more support on the Republican side than the Democratic side. So I can't give you a specific agenda, but I've given you the kinds of things you're very likely to see if somebody from Kentucky is setting the agenda in the Senate.
Senator, my question was going to be about health care. I think you just answered it, so I'm going to defer to the next question.
Okay.
Senator McConnell, thanks so much for coming today. John Jennings with the Underwriters Group. Next question is, congressional approval ratings are at an all-time low. How will you reinvigorate American confidence in our government's ability to get things done?
Yeah, John McCain, who's got a wicked sense of humor, says that as far as congressional approval rating is concerned, we're down to paid staff and family members. Let Let me just say, Congress deserves a lousy approval rating. I certainly wouldn't vote, if a pollster called me and asked me to rate the Congress, I certainly would not be in the 14%. Congress is frequently unpopular because it's sort of like going to a baseball game and hollering at the umpires. But this level of disapproval is really low and richly deserved. And you've already heard the reasons for it. We don't do anything. I mean, we basically don't do squat. And there are a lot of problems out there that need to be addressed. And I know it's counterintuitive for a lot of you, but I think they're much more likely to be addressed if we get rid of this Democratic Senate, which doesn't want to do anything. I mean, the facts are obvious. This is not spin. I'm not spinning you guys. The facts are obvious. We don't do anything in the Senate. It's literally shut down. So I don't know that that guarantees a higher approval rating, but I do think the American people would like to see us working on the problems that they perceive to be out there that are kind of languishing under the one-man rule. The way we've been operating, it's one-man rule. The president has all the authority. He does everything he wants to. We can't interrupt that because the Senate won't allow any interruption of it. Look at his approval rating. 28 in Kentucky, down everywhere in the country, including the, you all know red and blue, right? Down everywhere, including the blue states and the purple states. I think what the country would like to see is the president get off this sort of left-wing mission that he's on, come to the political center, and let's tackle some of the big problems confronting the country. And right at the top of the list is this issue of tax reform and stopping exporting jobs because of this excessively high corporate tax rate. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator McConnell, for joining us today. I'm David Roth with Kentucky Opera. You may have answered this already, but we have two parts to this question. What do you think or believe is the most pressing domestic issue facing the Senate today? And as a follow-up, what do you think is the most important international issue facing the Senate?
On the second one, I hope you'll forgive me kind of a long answer. Obviously, the state of the economy is not good. And, but there are some bright spots, and energy is a bright spot. We're now the #1 natural gas producer in the world. That's great. Hydraulic fracking and horizontal drilling have put us on a path to having North American oil independence by 2020 or sooner. All of that is good. I think we ought to be encouraging, not impeding, the energy boom that's going on in this country. And this is an administration whose energy program is subsidizing wind and solar. You remember Solyndra. Look, I think it's fine to have venture capitalists. I just don't want them playing with my money or your money. We've got a lot of very viable energy options. Now, if you'll bear with me a minute, I see Henry standing there. If you'll bear with me a minute, on the international side, this is a little bit longer answer, but I really think everything relates to everything else. If you go back to the president's speech in Cairo in 2009, remember that much publicized speech to the Muslim world? Here was the crux of it. Here was the takeaway. Number one, there was nothing particularly exceptional about America, so a denial of American exceptionalism. And since we're not exceptional, if we just all talk to each other better, more often, everything would be better. So clearly, the president's foreign policy orientation was toward bringing us back and reducing our influence and talking a lot. Okay, let's look at some examples of that policy applied in the real world. The bad decision number one was to not leave a residual force behind in Iraq. All of the military leadership recommended a residual force. If you're looking for examples, think of Germany after World War II. Think of Japan after World War II. Think of Korea after the Korean War. There's something about once you've fought a war to a win that keeps things from backsliding, like having a residual force. And they recommended 10,000 to 12,000 troops for two purposes. Number one, the ongoing training of the Iraqi military, which left to its own devices, its specialty is throwing down its arms and running. And the second would be a counterterrorism component. Bad decision number two. Nothing wrong with entering into the talks with the Iranians. In fact, we gave the president sanctions he did not want, but to his credit, once he got them, he used them. They brought them to the table. And then we said, Mr. President, at the end of this 6-month period of discussion with the Iranians, we want to make sure they don't think you just want to keep talking. So we ought to, at the end of the 6-month period, ratchet up the sanctions so that they know it gets worse and not better at the end of the 6-month period. Well, he threatened to veto that bill. So it won't surprise you to know when the time ended in July, we're still talking. And I think the message the Iranians take out of this is this guy loves to talk, so why don't we keep talking? Bad decision number 3, I'm losing count here. He's announced we're not going to leave a residual force behind in Afghanistan. The military always salutes and follows orders in our country, but it's noteworthy that the incoming Commandant of the Marine Corps, the guy coming in, not the one going out, publicly differed with that decision. These are the folks who fought the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and whether the president thought they were good wars or bad wars, and by the way, he made a distinction. He said the Iraq war was the bad war and the Afghan war was the good war. Nevertheless, the wars having been fought, no matter how you felt about them, why go backward? So that decision I hope he'll reverse. Finally, if you're Vladimir Putin and you're looking at all this, and you think the single biggest geopolitical disaster of the previous century was the breakup of the Soviet Union, you say, well, I think I'll take Crimea. And he did. I think I'll encroach on eastern Ukraine. And he is. One of the best speeches I ever heard was right before we broke for the elections, was a speech at the joint session of the Congress by the fabulous new president of Ukraine. They're really lucky to have him. And here was the upshot of his speech to us just a month ago. He said, thanks for the blankets. Thanks for the blankets. We've sent them blankets and meals ready to eat. If you haven't been in the military, MREs. They'd like to defend their country, and they're feeling really stupid because when the Soviet Union broke up, there were all kinds of nuclear weapons in Ukraine, and they gave them up in return for territorial guarantees. Boy, they're thinking they made a bad deal. Why do you think the Iranians want nuclear weapons so much? Once you get the nuclear weapon, you're in the club, nobody can mess with you. So it's hard to think of anything the president hadn't botched. I do think he's still got time to reverse the Afghan decision to not take all of our forces out, we need to leave behind a residual force. He can still arm the Ukrainians. Why would we not want to give them a chance to fight? You know, nobody's suggesting sending troops in. He is using air power against ISIS, but I think it's appropriate to ask the question, would ISIS exist had we left a residual force behind in Iraq? Had we aided the Syrian rebels 3 years ago when everybody thought Assad was going to fall? But we are where we are. And air power has its limitations, but I'm glad he's doing what he's doing, and we are helping the Kurds, and they seem to be willing to fight, and that's good. But sorry for the lengthy answer, but I really think America retreating from the rest of the world is not going to work. Not going to work. The vacuum will be filled. Who do you want it filled by? The Chinese, the Russians, who? And that does not mean that I'm advocating jumping into every conflict around the world. I'm not. But there are all kinds of ways in which we can influence policy, and we ought to be arming the people who are basically on our side, particularly the Ukrainian government. We ought to be leaving a residual force behind in Afghanistan. Sorry for the delay, Henry.
That's fine. It's very interesting. Senator, follow-up question or revisit the issue of coal. The chairman, CEO of LG&E and KU was here last month and explained the billions of dollars of capital investment to repower, I guess, the whole state of Kentucky with, of course, natural gas and many other improvements. And so as you visit the coal country, I'm curious to know how you talk about rejobbing that whole industry that is lost, apparently.
Yeah, well, they don't have any choice. They have to assume these regulations are going to go into effect. And so it's not surprising. That's why the president's doing this, so that everybody has to adjust. What's tragic about this is coal has a future. It may or may not have a future in the U.S., but it has a future. And it's a reliable, dependable source of energy. Natural gas prices go up and down pretty rapidly. We need it all, Henry. You know, I'm thrilled about the fact that we're independent in natural gas. I'm thrilled that we're going to be independent in oil, but we need it all. And coal is going to be a part of the mix. No matter how young you are in this room, coal is going to be a part of the mix everywhere. The question is, will it be part of the mix in the United States? And I think it's a really bad mistake to deal coal out of the equation.
Thank you, Senator. My name's Ken Grossman. I own Executive Image Custom Clothiers. And there were a number of questions on our survey about Ebola and the health risks to the United States. I'm going to ask you 3 of them. Do you support a travel ban on flights from West Africa? Are you satisfied with the response from our government and the Center for Disease Control? And have funding cuts to government agencies inhibited our response?
Well, with regard to funding, Dr. Fauci said on a Sunday show just Sunday, funding was not an issue. And I'm sure he said that because we've given them everything they've asked for, and if the president asks for more, we'll give it to him. I do support a travel ban. That's different from a flight ban. There are no flights direct from there to here. But I think a travel ban makes good sense. I think they're in the process of moving in that direction, even though they said earlier they didn't think that was necessary. You had a third component?
The response from the Center for Disease Control and our government, are you satisfied with it?
Yeah, well, I think we'll wait and see whether it's been.
Maybe we've done something right.
Yeah. Well, you know, I join everybody else. I mean, you got kind of a breakdown on the competence side, too. I mean, when somebody can jump the fence at the White House and not be tackled till he gets to the East Room, goodness gracious. Over at the IRS, they're targeting the president's political enemies. I've got a lot of complaints about misuse of the government to pursue political ends and just general competence. This is potentially a very, very serious, it already is a serious health crisis in Africa. We will have no arguments over supporting the president and his efforts in any way that he requests. In fact, we appropriated $88 million right before we left a month ago, and whatever he needs will be there.
Okay, last question.
Senator, as chairman of the Speakers Committee, I want to thank you for being here today, and thanks to your team who helped make all the arrangements. Thank you for taking questions, and so all of you know, the senator will be available for a few minutes after this meeting. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks.